Well, hello everyone. David Neff here. We are live, and today we are going to be doing a debate review. This debate was between Trent Horn and CosmicSkeptic on the question, does God exist? This was done on the Pine Truth Aquinas channel. This was a superb debate, and I highly recommend that everyone watches it. We are, due to time constraints tonight, we're just going to be going over Trent's opening statements, but later on we're going to be probably in a day or two, we'll be going over the rest of the debates. But with that said, Leo, feel free to introduce yourself.
Yeah, I'm Leo Filius. I do pretty much physics and philosophy on my channel. If that interests you, go check it out.
Yep. So with that, let's get right into the crux of the debate. I think this was do you have anything to say before we begin about the debates?
No, this is not a debate that I have seen.
Okay, sure. So pretty much Trent's two big opening statement, two arguments are existence of God being the cosmological argument and the moral argument. So those are pretty much just only two arguments. With that, let's just hit the play button and dive right in.
And then I'll lay out the format for today's debate. Why don't you start, Trent?
I would turn it up just a little bit on YouTube.
Catholic Answers. I have master's degrees in theology, philosophy, and bioethics, and I've authored 9 books.
I'm trying to turn it up.
Catholic Answers, I explain and defend the Catholic faith. I also host my own podcast called The Council of Trent, and if you're Catholic, you'll get the pun. Yeah. Or at least if you're well-educated, you'll get the pun. COUNSEL, of course. If you want to check that out, you can see it on iTunes, Council of Trent, or you can support it at TrentHornPodcast.com. I'm married to my lovely wife, Laura. I have 2 wonderful little boys at home and a third on the way in September.
Thanks very much, Trent. Alex.
My name is Alex. I'm a YouTuber, as much as I hate that label, but I'm also studying for a degree in philosophy and theology at St. John's College, Oxford University. I think these days people tend to introduce me more as a vegan advocate than a philosopher of religion, but that's kind of old hat to me. It's what I've been doing for the longest time, and it's been a while since I've done one of these debates. But yeah, I'm not married. I don't have any children, but I'm here for the ride, and I'm looking forward to it.
It's great to have both of you. I mean, obviously, being a Catholic myself, I agree with Trent, but I admire Trent. I admire you, Alex. You do a great job explaining your position. So it's really an honor to have both of you on the show. All right, why don't we begin? I just want to let everybody know the format of today's debate, and then we'll jump right into it. We're going to have opening statements, 15 minutes each. Then we will have first rebuttals, 7 minutes each. Then second rebuttals, which will take 4 minutes. Then we'll have cross-examination for 12 minutes. And then we'll have audience questions. So if you're watching live here on YouTube...
What was the time that he said for opening statements? Did he say 10 minutes or 12 for opening statements?
I think he said 12.
Okay.
And when we do get a question, each person gets 2 minutes to answer a question addressed to them, and then their opponent will get 1 minute to respond. And then we will wrap up with closing statements of 5 minutes each. I have a timer right here, and so I'll be timing them. You're welcome, of course, to time yourself. But why don't we begin with you, Trent, correct?
Sure.
You're okay? That's good. We'll start with 15 minutes. I'll let you know. 3, 2, and go.
Sure. Well, Matt, before we start, actually, could you let everyone know the topic of the debate?
Thank you. That's probably a good idea. My understanding is that we are going to be debating veganism, Trent. I don't know if you knew that, but we're going to be debating, I believe, God's existence. So Trent is going to be making the positive case, and then I believe, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, Alex, that you'll be critiquing that case. Perhaps that's more accurate than saying you'll be making a case for atheism, but feel free to interject.
That's about right, although I'm trying to make things a little bit more interesting, Matt. So we'll see.
All right.
Yeah.
Have I forgotten anything else?
I don't think so.
Did I mention that I'm vegan?
He's a vegan, apparently. All right. So Trent, are you ready?
I am.
Start whenever you like.
Okay. Well, I'd like to thank Matt for hosting this debate and Alex for agreeing to participate in it. So in this debate, I want to ask 9 yes-no questions and then show that the answers to those questions lead to a cause of the universe that has the traditional divine attributes, or what most people call God. So let's get started. Number one, does the universe have an explanation for its existence? We know some objects in the universe are contingent, or their existence must be explained by something else. This debate exists because of computers and internet connections. We pray you stay up. The devices you watch it on exist because of factories and power sources. All of these things are contingent, or they don't explain.
So do you want to go through these 9 questions one at a time then? Does that sound agreeable?
Yeah, I was thinking just let him ask his one question and an explanation for the question, and then as soon as he's finished that question, we just go one by one instead of playing the whole thing through and then trying and
then lose our spot. Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, I was feeling it would be just best to just stop one by one. So
right on.
Finish.
Instead, they must be explained by something else. So how do we explain them? One way would be to posit an infinite chain of contingent things explaining each other. But that doesn't explain why the whole series of things exists any more than an infinitely long chain could explain how a chandelier is hanging above my head. You could also say that an object's existence doesn't need to be explained. But this violates the principle of sufficient reason, or PSR, which says things have a reason for why they exist. We should believe this principle is true because if it were false, we would expect unexplainable events like objects popping into and out of existence without a cause to happen more often, or to put it more accurately, to happen at all. Science relies on PSR being true because otherwise we could never rule out the conclusion that things we observe simply have no reason for why they exist. Finally, without PSR, we couldn't explain negative states of affairs. For example, it does not make sense to ask at this moment, why isn't Matt Fradd's hair on fire? But it would make sense to ask that question if a blowtorch were hitting his scalp and his hair remained unburned. Both cases presuppose that things which exist must have reasons for why they exist, and they don't exist for no reason at all. But the explanation for the contingent things we observe cannot be another contingent thing. So it must be something beyond the universe, or the entire collection of contingent things, that explains why everything exists. Number two.
Okay, so that was the first question.
Yeah, that so he's taking the PSR, which is the principle of sufficient reason here, and for me personally, I would just reject the principle of sufficient reason. The one claim that he did make that puzzled me the most was the claim that science relies on the principle of sufficient reason. Science, at least like physics and chemistry, the hard sciences, shouldn't be construed in terms of reasons. It's not looking for reasons, really. It's more, and this is the thing with the hard sciences, is that ultimately what it reduces to is just equations of motion and how they evolve in time. So we're not looking, scientists aren't looking for reasons, they're looking for equations that they can use to describe the systems that will match the observations that we make. As well, one can posit, oh, sure, yeah, there's contingent things, but the concept of a brute contingency, something that is contingent but just exists, is not logically or metaphysically incoherent or impossible. So one would have to give a good argument for why a brute contingency shouldn't be considered a thing that is likely to exist, whether or not they seek to argue for its metaphysical impossibility or incoherence, or just show that it's not the most likely option. I can't say I've ever seen a good reason for that other than that, oh, well, yeah, there's just got to be a reason for it. But again, that presupposes the principle of sufficient reason, which I personally can't say I've ever seen a really good argument for. There are things that happen in reality, at least without any sufficient conditions for their actualization, albeit there are still necessary conditions. So the idea that there are things that can happen without causes, that there are. The reason that it doesn't happen at all scales is, well, that's just not the way reality works. It's the same reason why you don't see things at the scale that we exist at behaving the way that they exist at cosmological scales either. Reality behaves differently at different scales, and it's not obligated to carry those operations into the different scales, nor is reality obligated to operate the way that our intuitions tell us it should at all scales. And I think that the principle of sufficient reason is largely rested on that assumption, and I just don't think it's a reasonable assumption to make. So if I were responding to Trent directly here, I would just say, look, I reject the principle of sufficient reason, and I would need to hear a solid argument for why I should believe that there must be reasons or explanations for anything and everything.
Right, and I would agree with that. And to add on to that, we do see things popping in and out of existence all the time. They're called quantum fluctuations.
So what I would say is that there isn't anything coming into and going out of existence. I don't think that ever happens in reality. That's just not a thing that the way that Dr. Craig will often word it. Well, I just don't understand how someone could believe that being comes from non-being. The whole comes from is not a thing that actually happens in reality. Everything that is in reality from the top to the bottom is in space-time, assuming that space-time is fundamental. In the case that it isn't, then space-time would just emerge from more fundamental things, and that, I mean, that's just getting into the weeds. But so there isn't anything that comes into or goes out of existence with it, and so that's certainly not a thing that the universe does. As it relates to vacuum field fluctuations, I would just say that that's the result of fields looking different at different moments in time. We will see that the energy will not be, that when we map out the field, the numbers describing the amount of energy at every point, albeit hovering slightly above zero, will not be the same at every snapshot of that field, essentially. And so what physicists would say is that the field fluctuates.
Right. So wouldn't the B theory of time, I know we spoke about this the other day, wouldn't the B theory of time completely negate this argument entirely?
I don't know if the B theory of time would negate particularly this argument. This is more of a like a Leibniz cosmological argument, or a contingency argument, perhaps, where he's relying more on the principle of sufficient reason, the idea that if something exists, there must be some reason for its existence, either in some external cause or entity, or within the necessity of its own being, which would mean that to say that either something's contingent or it's necessary. If it's contingent, its existence must come from some other entity, and then either that entity is contingent, in which case its existence must come from some other entity. And so at the end of the day, you'd have to get to something that just exists necessarily. I do know that in philosophy and metaphysics, there is the idea that such a worldview would get you to something called modal collapse, where you eventually fall into necessitarianism, because everything about reality is fundamentally rooted in a necessity. Reality is then fundamentally necessary, so everything happens the way that it does. Everything is the way that it is necessarily, which gets you into necessitarianism. And then the idea of modal language, the idea of even speaking in terms of possibilities, seems to fly out the window, which doesn't seem to be something that philosophers would want to give up. We seem to have the capability of speaking in possibilities. The idea that something is contingent, I don't think means that there isn't any way that its existence could just be. And I would just say that I would need to see an argument in favor of that.
All right. So this is his question number 2.
Does the universe explain its own existence? No, because that would make the universe a necessary thing, or something that has to exist by its very nature. But there are no reasons to believe the universe is necessary, and many reasons to believe it is not necessary. For example, the question, why is that triangle black, prompts an intelligible answer, whereas the question, why does that triangle
Would you be willing to drop it down to 1/2?
It's a triangle. But the question,
there we go. I think that'll be a little
why does the
better.
universe exist does not prompt the retort, because it's a universe, since existence is not a necessary property of universes. It's more like the question, why is that triangle black, which warrants an explanation beyond the thing that needs to be explained. There are 2 other factors about our universe that count against it having necessary existence: its property of change and its finite past. So let's start with change. Change occurs when a potential X becomes an actual Y. This can involve intrinsic change like growth, or extrinsic change like motion. But no potential X can become an actual Y on its own any more than water can freeze itself, or a train car could propel itself. Instead, something like a freezer or a locomotive must actualize the potential for change in these objects. But of course, those actualizers only change because something else actualized their potential for change. Could an infinite series explain this kind of change? No. Just as an infinitely long train of boxcars would sit motionless without a locomotive, an infinite number of things that must be actualized by something else would be changeless unless there was a cause of the series that is just pure actuality and had no potential. Just as a locomotive pulls without being pulled, this instance of pure actuality would actualize without being actualized by anything else. And since the universe contains a mixture of potential and actual, it is not the purely actual cause we're looking for. What about the universe's finite past? Something is necessary only if it is impossible for it to not exist. But if the universe came into existence, then it can't be necessary. It would instead stand in need of an explanation for why it exists. One reason to believe the universe has not always existed is because the past contains causal chains that explain objects and events in the present. However, no past causal series that terminates in the present can be infinitely long because that would lead to a contradiction. Consider Robert Kuhn's paper passer thought experiment. Imagine beings called paper passers who existed every January 1st in the past. So there's one at January 1st, 2020, one at January 1st, 2019, and so on into an infinite past. Their job is to receive a piece of paper from the passer who held it during the year before them and to see if it's blank. If the paper is blank, then they write a unique number assigned to them on it. If the paper they receive already has a number on it, however, then they just pass the paper along to the next paper passer at the end of the year. Now here's the question. What number is written on the paper given to the paper passer at January 1st, 2020, whose year will go downhill very quickly? There has to be some number written on it, because if it were blank, then the 2020 paper passer would write his number on it. But it can't be blank, because if it were, the 2019 paper passer would have written his number on it. But the 2019 paper passer could not have written his number on it, because if the paper were blank when he got it, the 2018 paper passer would have written his number on it. If there are an infinite number of paper passers, then we have a paradox. There is a piece of paper that arrives in the present that isn't devoid of numbers, but also can't have any particular number written on it. And this isn't unique to this scenario. Other thought experiments like Thomson's lamp or the Grim Reaper paradox show that objects cannot have infinite causal histories. This means causal series must be finite in nature, and the first member of the series would have to be uncaused. And since causal chains must be finite, this means the number of events before today must be finite, and so time is finite. If the past is finite, then our universe began to exist and would require an uncaused cause for its existence. Notice that we are at an important juncture. We've seen the universe as an explanation for its existence, and that explanation is not the universe itself. Instead, this explanation is necessary, or it explains its own existence. It is uncaused because it is the source of all causes, and it is pure actuality because it is the source of all change and motion in the universe. What else can we know about this cause of the universe? Number 3, is this cause changeable? No, for 2 reasons. First, change only happens when potential is reduced to actual, but this
was that the end of the question?
Yeah, that was.
There was kind of a slow, like a smooth transition there. So I was like, wait, are we done?
Yeah.
So there were 2 things there. Number 1, again, he's saying essentially that if something is contingent, there's no possible way that it just has being. That there has to be a why there. But I would just need to see an argument for that. Things like reasons and meanings and purposes are not things, at least I don't think, are things that are objective in reality. They're things that humans seek about reality. And I don't think that reality is obligated to provide some sort of reason or meaning or purpose for why a thing is the way that it is or why it has being. Those are just not like, so the question, why does reality itself exist? Why is there something rather than nothing? I don't even think that's the right question to ask. To me, it's a meaningless question. So because I would just grant that the universe is a brute contingency. It is contingent. It could have not existed, but it does exist. Right. Granting what it could have done doesn't really have a bearing on what it is. It is extant. It does exist, and that's just all. So I would reject this notion that if something contingent cannot have either cannot have a lack of an explanation or cannot have an explanation in itself. And I would reject the idea of a necessarily existent being, because I think that ultimately what happens if you grant one of those is that you end up back into modal collapse. In terms of the finitude of the causal past, a lot of these thought experiments, the one he gave, the Grim Reaper paradox, Hilbert's Hotel, their conceptions, they don't really carry over into the physical realm. Physical reality could very well have an infinite causal past. There's nothing in mathematics or physics that prevents that. So that's not a thing that we need to be worried about. But chances are is that physical reality probably is causally closed, and there's likely not an infinite causal chain. But that's certainly not something that would be impossible. Also, this notion that the universe comes into existence presupposes a tensed notion of time, because, again, on a tense-less notion, there isn't any distinction between past, present, and future. Temporal becoming is not an actual physical feature of reality, so the earliest moment in time is not the moment at which the universe is ontically actualized. It's just the first moment of time. So again, there seems to be a presumption of both the principle of sufficient reason and a tense notion of time there.
Yeah, and if you're interested, we do, Leo and I actually did a in-depth discussion on that the other day. Check out the video, and we go more into that there. So this is the Trent's next question.
Cause is pure actuality, so it can't change. Second, since causal chains can't be infinite, this means there can't be an infinite series of events. Since change is an event, this means the first cause cannot be subject to such an event, or it must be changeless. Question 4, is the cause temporal? No, because time is how we measure change. And because the cause of the universe is changeless, it follows that it must be timeless as well. Number 5, is this cause material? No, for 2 reasons. First,
okay, anything you want to respond to that right there, or do you just want me to continue, and you can just say stop when you want to respond to something?
Is this, we're in the third question, right?
I think he kind of skipped. I think we kind of skipped over to the 5th question. You just babbled. You just asked the question pretty quickly, and then just moved on to the next one. Pretty smooth transition, and
well, so thus far,
so thus far, want me to back it up a little bit?
Yeah, if you want to.
Okay.
changeless.
By the way, if I don't have mute on StreamYard, can you hear the video as an echo?
No, I don't think so.
Temporal. No, because time is how we measure change.
No,
and because the cause of the universe is changeless, it follows that it must be timeless as well. Number 5, is this cause material? No, for 2 reasons. First, we know the cause is changeless.
Wait, hold on. Okay, so so he is counting through. So can we go back to question 3? I thought all of this was a part of question 3. That was my problem. Oops.
Yeah, I thought. Yeah, it's
temporal. Happens when potential is reduced to actual, but this cause is pure actuality, so it can't change. Second, causal chains can't be infinite. This means there can't be an infinite series of events. Since change is an event, this means the first cause cannot be subject to such an event, or it must be changeless. Question 4, is the cause temporal? No, because time we measure change.
That
because
was question 3.
The cause of the universe is changeless. It follows that it must be timeless.
So question 3. What I'm confused. It just, I guess I don't know what he's getting at with this distinction between the actual and potential here. That can, for me at least, that gets a little fuzzy, because in physics, those are going to have entirely different connotations than what they're going to mean in philosophy. So I really don't know what. It's going to be hard with specifically number 3 to answer. I don't know what he means by potential and actual. I don't know how he's using those terms.
Right, because they're easy to equivocate the meanings of those terms.
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
As well. Number 5, is this cause material?
Can we repeat number 4?
Yeah, sure. Let me go back here.
Or it must be changeless. Question 4, is the cause temporal? No, because time is how we measure change, and because the cause.
So
okay, is the cause temporal? The problem here is that you can't have causality, and people like William Lane Craig would reject this. He would say that causality is a metaphysical principle. What's the argument for that would be my response, because it seems that causality is something that we see firmly as relations between spatio-temporal events. I don't know how one can just take that and extend it beyond that when we've never seen that at all. So causality is procedural. It's a process, and it requires time. It's a relation between spatio-temporal events. This is certainly how we see it in physics, where there is such a thing as causality. And I mean, even at the classical level, there's not. But that's just a much deeper discussion. The problem with this idea of atemporal causation is that, well, if causality is itself a temporal procedure, how does one cause without time? And if somebody just wants to say, oh, well, because it's metaphysical, then all I ask is, well, what's the argument for that? Why should I believe that causality is something metaphysical when we've never seen that? We've only seen it as a relation between spatio-temporal events, and we don't even see it at all levels or all scales of reality.
Right. All right.
So the universe is changeless, it follows that it must be timeless as well. Number 5, is this cause material? No, for 2 reasons. First, we know the cause is changeless and matter is always changing, at least on the atomic and subatomic levels. Second, if the cause is timeless, then it must also be spaceless or immaterial, because to be in space is to be in time. Even if the cause were a simple thing with no proper parts, it would still change in relation to other things or points in space. And so it can't be confined to space, just as it can't be confined to time. Number 6, is the cause.
So the problem, number 5, is the cause material. So what he essentially defined there is something that does not exist in space, does not exist in time, and is not constructed of mass or energy. I fail to see how that's distinct from non-existence in any way, shape, or form. If something doesn't exist, I think everybody would agree then it doesn't exist in space, it doesn't exist in time, and it isn't made of mass or energy. So then how do we distinguish between something existing and being spaceless, timeless, and non-physical, and the very same thing but not existing at all? I'm failing to understand what that would even be. And if there's no material prior to this event of creation and no space-time, then what this seems to me to be saying is that God acted on nothing, yet created something.
Right, and that's basically what creation ex nihilo is.
Yeah, it's saying
it's basically God waving a magic wand and poofing things into existence. That's literally what it is.
Yeah, I mean, if something acts on nothing yet produces something, acting on nothing is the same as not acting on anything. And if God was not acting on anything, then it seems to me that God is not in a state of action. And if he's not in a state of action and creation is an act, then he's not creating. Creatio ex nihilo. The thing is, the principle ex nihilo nihil fit, out of nothing, nothing comes, is often utilized to invoke the principle of creatio ex nihilo, that, well, then it must have been created out of nothing, but that itself violates the principle that out of nothing, nothing comes. If you can't get anything out of nothing, then even if you have something there that can create, if you give it nothing from which to create, then it doesn't produce anything. And Scott Clifton brought this up in his debate with William Lane Craig. How do you get an effect without something there that can be affected? There's sort of an affect-effect relation, that in order to get an effect, you have to affect something such that it changes and produces the effect. But if there were no things there that God could affect, then through what mechanisms or procedure do we get an effect?
Right, exactly. So it's basically just God waving a magic wand and poofing the universe into existence. That's literally what creation ex nihilo is.
A lot of people will say, well, God it was an act of his will. And I would just say, well, what was he using his will to act upon?
Right, exactly.
I mean, if it was nothing more than an act, then, like what you said, David, it is literally reducing it to magic. He wished for it to exist, and there it was. And if you've reduced the creation of the universe to magic, then so be it. But then I think that you've abandoned any hope of claiming that you have an intellectual position.
Right, absolutely. And I agree with that 100%. And as you said before, I like what you do. Like, God is already, as he's defining him, spaceless, timeless, and immaterial, and all of that. So how does that distinct from something that doesn't even exist?
Mm-hmm.
So,
and I know that Trent would probably start listing other properties that God has, but if the fundamental properties God has are non-locality, non-temporality, and non-physicality, then it seems to me that you're just claiming that something that doesn't exist has all these properties. It would be no different than me talking about Harry Potter. We're just talking about an abstraction at that point.
Right, exactly. And Dr. Sean Carroll, in his debate with Dr. William Crane Craig, we spoke about it the other day, actually makes a really good argument in his opening statement, and that is that theism is ill-defined. And this is pretty much what Trent is proving right here, that theism is so ill-defined. Because I don't think he actually defines what he means by God in his opening statement. I listened to Trent's statement a couple of times, and I can't recall anywhere where he actually defines what he means by the word God. But I'm just going to read.
So the one thing I wanted to say quickly was, it seems that at least when we're talking about some of the most fundamental properties of God, we're not getting what the properties are. We're getting what properties aren't. God is spaceless, timeless, immaterial, things like that. We're being told what God isn't, not what God is. And I just, and I don't like saying this because I think it can be, I think that oftentimes it's stated too often and it can be too reductive, but I do think that there is a kernel of truth to it, that with a lot of this, what we're fundamentally seeing is just defining God into existence. You don't have any actual real object or anything there, but then you slap a bunch of labels on it and call it God. And I can understand how that might be a little bit reductive, but I do think that at the end of the day, that's what's being done. Like Aaron Ra often says, before you start talking about what something is, there has to be an is. There has to be a there. And I don't think we've established that for God. All we're told are the properties it has. What is it that has those properties? I can give the properties of an electron, but there's a there that can be independently measured and verified that possesses the properties.
Right.
So it just, I think this would get into some different philosophical notions about is an object anything more than its properties. So because if somebody said, well, an object, if you took away all of the properties of an object, you wouldn't have that object at all. So God is just the sum total of his properties. I mean, that would just leads into its own discussion. I'm not going to go fully down that road right now.
Right, and I'm just going to read what Dr. Sean Carroll said. He said that theism is not well defined. I'm going to be emphasizing this point because if you ask a theist about the definition, they will give you some very rigorous sounding definition of what they mean by God, the most perfect being, the ground for all existence, and so forth. There are thousands of such definitions, which is an issue, but the real problem is not with the definitions. It's when you connect the notion of God to the world we observe. That's where apparently an infinite amount of flexibility comes in, and I'm going to be inveighing against using that in cosmology. So, and yeah, so when we have these cosmological issues and scientific issues, theism is so poor as a model simply because it is so not well defined. Theism doesn't even try to do this, and it can't because, as it says, it's simply not well defined. So
that's the problem with starting from something that's entirely conceptual and doesn't really exist, is that you will always be able to add on or remove properties that you say that it has to get it to fit whatever data we currently get. This is why the idea of God, people used to say, oh, well, no, the universe has to be eternal because it must be it's sort of coextended with God and eternally sustained by him. And then we discovered that there is a beginning to the universe. And, people are like, oh, well, see, now that shows that God must exist, because what else could have brought the universe into existence? So no matter what data we bring, you can always make theism fit that data, which means that there isn't a way really to falsify the notion that God exists. And what that means is that there isn't much utility in the idea, and as Sean Carroll says, the idea is just ill-defined. What is it that we're really talking about? Because it seems to consistently change to fit whatever data we currently have. In another 50 years, say that we show that the universe is eternal again, all the theists will go back to saying, oh, well, the universe is eternal alongside God, and God eternally sustains it in existence, like they were 500 years ago. Exactly. If we got rid of the beginning of the universe, people like Dr. Craig would not stop believing in God. They'd just stop using that argument, but they wouldn't stop believing in God.
Right, exactly. And let's be honest here. Pretty much nothing is going to stop them from believing in God. Let's just be real here. But my goal here is not to try and deconvert anyone. So that's not what my goal of this stream is. So, yeah, and as Dr. Strong, and this is kind of the same thing with young Earth creationists, how they want to manipulate the data to fit their idea of young Earth creationism, even though an overwhelming amount of evidence contradicts what young Earth creationism wants to believe. Mm-hmm. So I kind of find it that there's the same kind of game going on between theism and what we actually observe.
Yes.
All right, so let's continue.
By the way, can I ask really quickly, are you wearing a Targaryen shirt?
I am.
No, you're not. Never mind.
Yeah, Jay and Silent Bob.
Oh, okay. Oh, hey, that's pretty good too. I saw the red, and then it looked like a black or a dark blue, and I was like, does that have House Targaryen on it? Because it kind of looks like it could have been part of the head of the dragon in the red. Anyway, we can continue if you're ready.
Yeah, Kevin Smith is an awesome person. I got to meet him a while back.
Oh, that's pretty cool.
Yep.
Oh yeah.
Yep. His movie, I think Dogma is one of my favorite movies of all time.
Yeah.
So,
that's a good one.
Yep.
Contradict the cause being pure actuality. To impose a limit on something would be the same as saying there is a potential for that thing which the thing in question can never actualize. That means the cause's causal power could not be limited, which is another way of saying the cause is all-powerful, or there is nothing it can't do. And if the cause can bring something into existence from nothing, then there really is nothing it can't do if it can accomplish that feat. Number 7, is the cause necessary? Yes, because if it were contingent.
That sixth question almost seems to be a restatement of, like, I think the fourth and the fifth.
Yeah.
I don't know what it means to talk about causality when we're talking about the universe. If we're talking about things in the universe at some particular scale in the universe, I think there's some utility to talking about it that way. And this was also a point that Sean Carroll hammered Dr. Craig on in their debate, is that causality just is not the right language to use when we talk about the universe. And though Dr. Carroll didn't word it this way, I think that this, I don't know if he would agree with this. I think he probably would, and would relate it to that statement. And that is that we exist within a very, very small, a very narrow scale of reality. And our intuitions and what we experience and how we experience reality is entirely contained in that scale. We have gone outside of that scale, both in the upward direction, the larger than direction, and in the smaller than direction. And what we have found is that when we go far beyond, far outside of the scale that we exist within, reality does not behave in ways that we would be accustomed to intuitively. And that's because human intuition is built off of human experience, and we only experience a very narrow scale of reality. You start going beyond that, reality is going to behave in ways that are different from what we're used to. So to then restrict reality to specifically the language we use, which is built off this very narrow scale, is just not right. It's not right to obligate reality to behave or be described by our languages or all aspects of our language, like causality, in these scales that are so far removed from the scale that we experience. It's just not accurate. We can't talk about reality that way, and that's why physicists don't talk about causes of the universe. So
exactly.
And the second problem there is, again, causality is procedural. What does it mean to say that you have causality absent space-time and mass energy?
Right. All right, so number 7 is the cause necessary.
Or if it depended on something else in order to exist, then this cause would need an explanation for why it exists, and our argument would start all over again. Also, because this cause is changeless, it can't go out of existence, because going from being existent to non-existent is a temporal and mutable process, and we know the cause of the universe is timeless and changeless. Moreover, in being pure actuality, this cause would have no potential for non-existence, and so could not fail to exist. Question 8 is the...
So, basically, God's existence because it's necessary is pretty much what he's arguing.
Yeah, it seems that there might have been something of an ontological argument hidden in there. I'm not entirely sure. It seems that way, but I would reject this notion of there even being a cause for the universe for the reasons that I just outlined. So to talk about what properties it has, I just think is not appropriate. He also said something about, coming into or going out of existence is a temporal process. I don't think I would say that things come into and go out of existence. They're either in space-time, in which point they exist, or they're not. I don't think things can enter into the space-time manifold from outside of it, primarily because I don't think there's such a thing as outside of it, nor do I think that things can go outside of it from within it, again, because I don't think there's such a thing as outside of space-time. Outside is itself a spatial reference.
Right. It's kind of like asking, what was time like before time?
Yeah, or what's north of the North Pole?
Right, exactly. The question doesn't make sense. And so, yeah, it's like what Dr. Sean Carroll hammered in. This is simply the wrong language. It's not even wrong.
Yeah, the physicists do not use this language when they talk about reality.
Right. And if you open up any quantum theory textbook, as Dr. Sean Carroll pointed out, you will not find the words God, first cause, any of that type of language in the textbook, and for good reason.
Cause personal? Yes, and here are 5 reasons to think so. 1, there are only 2 kinds of entities that exist. Concrete ones, like 2 toy blocks, and abstract ones, like the number 2 or the shape of a cube. But unlike concrete objects, abstract objects like numbers and shapes have no causal power. Therefore, the cause of the universe cannot be an abstract object like a number, but must be some kind of concrete object. But we also know this cause must be an immaterial concrete object.
So, like, how can something be an immaterial concrete object?
Yeah, I would really struggle. I do struggle with this notion of causality absent any physicality, because again, I would say causality is a physical spatiotemporal process. It's like saying that God had a temperature prior to reality. It just makes no sense to me. Temperature is a spatiotemporal, a physical thing. I don't know what it would mean to say that an object possesses some, at least as far as we are capable of knowing, some physical concept, if it is itself not physical. I don't know what it means to say something is causal or can stand in causal relations if it isn't a physical object.
Right.
Object. And the only immaterial causal reality we know of is some kind of mind, which means the cause must be personal in nature. 2, there are only 2 kinds of explanations for physical phenomena, scientific ones and personal ones. Scientific explanations consist of physical laws that describe matter-energy interactions. For example, the scientific answer to the question, why is that pot boiling, is that heat is agitating the water molecules and causing evaporation. The personal explanation would involve an intention of an agent, like the pot is boiling because I wanted tea. A universe beginning from nothing can't have a scientific explanation because a state of nothingness lacks the matter, energy, and descriptive laws that make up those explanations. Therefore, only a personal explanation of the universe remains. 3, this cause of the universe explains.
Yeah, so I get the point behind that argument. Sort of this, if the cause of the universe had existed literally forever, then and it was sufficient for the production of the universe, and it wasn't it was this sort of impersonal, mechanistic cause, then it should have created the universe forever ago, and the universe should also exist forever. So how do you have a timeless cause with a temporal effect? The only way is if the cause has the ability to refrain from producing its effect, which would mean that it has to have some sort of will. The problem with this is so it's the difference. Trent is right. There is a difference between mechanistic explanations and intentional explanations. But I do not hold to the idea of libertarian free will. I would say, I don't even call it free will. I say that humans have a level of agency. So I believe that our intentions, and I think that there is a powerful amount of corroborating evidence from neuroscience on this as well, that intentions are the result generally of physical processes occurring across the brain. Now, whether or not we can centralize what those causes or what those particular processes are, probably not, because there are so many of them across so much of the brain, you'd never really be able to centralize it and say that's what's causing this person to believe this way. But it's certainly the result of the neurophysiological processes that the brain undergoes.
I just wanted to highlight a couple comments in the comment section. Is he defining the difference between the 2 types of being based on their causal power? Poorly defined. And
I don't think so.
Yeah. Yet his own example shows that one action can have both mechanistic and intentional explanations and offer no ways to distinguish between the 2 based on observation.
Now that I do think that's a good point, because when he brings up the intentions, well, if somebody like me is a physicalist, they're going to grant that intentions ultimately, at least, result from the mechanistic operation of the brain. So yes, you can have intentions, but there's still mechanisms there. And the person who had the intention of making a cup of tea still had to be the one to physically turn the stove on and physically put the water in the pot. So there are still mechanistic things going on here that you still need a physical world in order for intentional in order for an agent with intentions to causally act upon those intentions such that they would produce the effects, the desired effects.
Yep.
Is the existence of not just material objects, but also abstract objects like numbers, mathematical truths, and propositions. But these entities only exist in the mind. And so if these objects have necessary existence, then they must reside in a necessarily existing mind that is explanatorily prior to them. Moreover, it has no potentiality, then its knowledge of these truths could not be limited, and must be all known. 4, many atheists say believe in God if they saw something like amputated limb healed through prayer. But this means that they would pick a divine explanation.
Can you pause it really quick? Because the last point that he just made, I can't even remember what it is that he said.
Want me to play it back?
Yeah.
Okay.
But these entities only exist in the mind. And so if these objects have necessary existence, then they must reside in a necessarily existing mind that is explanatorily prior.
Can you back it up before that?
Mind has no potential.
Yeah, sure. Let's see here.
Agent, like the pot is boiling because I wanted tea. A universe beginning from nothing can't have a scientific explanation because a state of nothingness lacks the matter, energy, and descriptive laws that make up those explanations. Therefore, only a personal explanation of the universe remains. 3, this cause of the universe explains the existence of not just material objects, but also abstract objects like numbers, mathematical truths, and propositions. But these entities only exist in the mind. And so if these objects have necessary existence, then they must reside in a necessarily existing mind.
That's what it was. Why should we believe that abstractions exist necessarily? What's the argument for that?
Right.
That would be what I would have to say. I can't say I've ever heard a good argument that abstractions exist necessarily. I would say that if they exist in minds, they don't exist necessarily. It seems, I feel like that's almost, I want to say, is it ad hoc what he just did? That, oh, well, abstractions, I take it that abstractions are necessary, and then that thereby mandates there must be a necessary mind, so a God exists. That seems a bit ad hoc to me. I would just say that, yeah, of course abstractions exist in minds, and minds are products of the physical world. So without the physical world, you wouldn't have abstractions.
Yep.
That is explanatorily prior to them. Moreover, if this mind has no potentiality, then its knowledge of these truths could not be limited, and so it must be all-knowing. 4, many atheists say they believe in God if they saw something like an amputated limb healed through prayer. But this means that they would pick a divine explanation for an event over simply saying the event has no cause whatsoever. But if our universe came into being just as inexplicably as a healed amputated limb, then atheists should be consistent and conclude that the universe is a divine cause as well. 5, our universe.
The problem there again is that we're supposing a tense notion of time, and that there's this sort of this ontic actualization of the universe, that the universe comes into being, which is not the case. I actually do like the way that Dr. Craig characterizes how somebody who takes a tense-less notion or a B-theoretical view of time with respect to the universe, and that would be that if you could imagine a yardstick begins at the first inch, but the existence of the yardstick does not begin at the first inch. The whole yardstick already exists, and it sort of has a front edge or a boundary at the first inch. And that's how most people that take the view that I do, at least, would view the universe. That the whole universe exists and is just there, and it's just bounded at one end. And that's what we would call the first moment or the earliest point in space-time.
Right, and right at the very, 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 very beginning of the Big Bang, right at the very beginning of the universe, that's when all the laws of physics, as we know them, kind of start to break down. And our physical equations and knowledge of physics is just so ill-equipped to really understand what's going on in that few microseconds before, right after the Big Bang. So, and there is still much more for physics to uncover.
Oh, yes, especially concerning the earliest moments of our universe.
Right. And we still haven't even scratched the surface. And as Dr. Sean Carroll hammered in, what you need to be doing is building models and testing those models. Can you build a model where the universe comes into existence but doesn't have a cause? Yes. And can you build a model where the universe is eternal? And again, the answer is yes. We're nowhere near the right model. But the point is that these models do exist, and we can test them, and we can search for models, and we can test them against what we actually see, and we can test them and narrow down which model best fits reality, which best fits our observations, and that's what that is what theism simply cannot do, because theism is ill-defined.
Yes, and I think that's why Dr. Craig in that in that very debate, actually, I actually rewatched it last night just because that is probably my favorite debate of all time. Which Sean Carroll is my #1 influence when it comes to physics. He would be #1 on my list. Leonard Susskind is #2, but is that Dr. Craig essentially in his closing remarks, I believe it was, he stated that it was either in his opening remarks or in his I think it was in his closing remarks. He said, Dr. Carroll keeps alluding to this, with the building models and, that God isn't a good model in this. And he said, well, that would only be true if I were offering theism up as a model. And he essentially conceded that that's not what he's doing. And it seems to me then that, well, what are you doing? Because if you are, in fact, trying to argue that there are arguments, philosophical arguments, that have premises that are theologically neutral, and those premises are largely supported by the empirical data that we have, and the conclusions of those arguments broadly have theistic implications, what this seems to me to be saying is that you are offering up theism as a sort of model for accounting for why we see a world that looks the way that it does. Why do we see a world that seems to have a beginning, a universe with a beginning? That the best way to explain why we see that is that there is this entity that we can call God that brought it into existence. So it seemed almost that and I'm not saying that Dr. Craig was doing this intentionally, because I don't think that he was, but it seems to me that he's almost talking out of two ends of his mouth, that, well, I think a really good model for helping us understand the reality that we observe and why it looks the way that it does. Why does the universe have a beginning? Why does it appear to be finely tuned for life? All of these things, which were the two arguments he offered. Theism can offer an explanation for why reality looks that way, and then says, oh, but I'm not offering theism up as a model. It seems to me there that he's, I'm not accusing him of doing it intentionally, but it does seem that he's talking out of both ends of his mouth there.
Right.
Contains moral properties that only make sense if they have a transcendent moral source. Now, morality only applies to persons. So if the cause of the universe is the source of these moral properties, then it must be a supremely good person and not an amoral, impersonal force. Which brings us to my last question. Number 9, is the cause of the universe good?
So can you pause it right there?
By good, we mean...
What? So if he's saying that if morality comes from this being and we're calling the being good, what moral system did we use to judge that the morality of this being is actually good to begin with? Because if you're saying the being good, we get our morality from this being, and the being is good, and that's who we get our morality from, and we're determining that this being is good based off of the morality that we get from it, seems to almost be sort of arguing in a circle there.
Right.
I don't... Go ahead.
Right. It's basically saying an action is good because God says that an action is good, therefore it's good. Kind of going around in a circle. But I think there's an even bigger problem with that. And the problem that I see with the moral arguments is that it is still subjective. There's this thing, why is something good or bad? I can easily say, well, because God said so. I can easily appeal to whatever God I want to in order to justify my moral actions. And Christians themselves can't even agree on what the Bible says. They can't agree on basic morality using the same exact methodology. And to make matters worse, if you want to say that the Bible God is the source of morality, okay, which Bible? The Bible says that it's inspired by God. Okay, well, that begs the question, which books belong in the Bible? Christians cannot agree on that. There's four distinct canons of Scripture: Orthodox, Catholic, Protestant, and Ethiopian canons. They're very different. If you can't even agree on what the Bible is, what hope do we have of appealing to the Bible for morals?
Exactly. I would, to really dig into this, and he might reveal it a little bit more, I would need to know what Trent's moral theory is. don't think he's a divine command theorist, but I just don't know.
Yeah, he's going a little bit more in depth later on, but he's almost finished wrapping up his speech. He's pretty much going to use the formula from Dr. William Lane Craig. So,
if objective moral values and duties, if God does not exist, objective moral values and duties do not exist.
Yeah,
objective moral values and duties do exist, therefore God exists. Yeah.
Yeah. So basically, that's where he's about to go.
Both the moral and non-moral sense of that word. A car has a bad timing belt, not because the belt is disobedient, but because it can't fulfill its purpose of synchronizing an engine's valves. It's bad.
So I should point out that Trent Horn and pretty much the entire Catholic Church appeals to what is called, I think, natural morals or the
natural law. Yeah.
Yeah, natural law. There we go. That's the word I was looking for. So that is what Trent Horn and pretty much what the Catholic Church teaches as a moral grounding. So that is what we're getting into right now.
Because it lacks something it needs in order to act in accord with its nature. And this is true not just for artificial objects, but also for natural ones like trees and animals. Now, if the cause of the universe has no potential and is pure actuality, then it must be good by definition.
Can you pause just for a second?
And so it cannot be bad in the non-moral sense of that word.
This is the second or third, maybe fourth time I've heard Trent use the term pure actuality. I don't know what that term means. But again, this comes down to whether the term is being used like in a physical sense or more of a metaphysical sense or something like that. So because there will be distinctions between it there.
Right. It seems like he's kind of equivocating the two meanings of the word. That's what I'm getting out of it. But correct me if I'm wrong. Do you sense that he's kind of equivocating these words?
Well, for me, it would depend on. I would need to know what the context under which he's saying it. If he's using the term actuality in more of a physical sense, and then the next sentence or whatever is using it more of a metaphysical sense, then I would say that there is equivocation. But if he's using it in the same sense the whole way through, then I don't think I would accuse him of equivocation there.
Yeah.
Word. But the cause is also morally good because it is the source of objective morality, or what I call moral facts. Alex said in his debate with Frank Turek that if objective...
That was me hitting my mic, unless you're pausing it for something else.
No, I thought you were going to say something. That's why I paused.
Yeah, no, that was me hitting my mic.
Then this would be a compelling argument for God. So we can make an argument like this. If moral realism is true, then God exists. Moral realism is true. Therefore, God exists. Moral realism is the view that human beings discover moral truths and don't create them. Truths like rape is always wrong or all human beings have equal worth do not depend on human beings for their existence. Alex seems to agree with premise one. Other famous atheists
also. So number one, I would just say I reject premise one. What's the argument that moral realism... I don't want to use this word because I don't think Trent would say this, but maybe he would. If he's saying something like moral realism necessitates God's existence, I think he's going to be very, very hard-pressed to make a case for that. If he's saying moral realism makes God's existence much more probable, he might have an argument there, but I do think there would be reasonable objections to that argument.
Right.
I don't think moral realism, I don't think one needs moral realism or needs God for moral realism. I know that this is explicit in the 2020 Phil survey that was just released. I know it's 2021, but I believe the survey was actually conducted in 2020. And most philosophers are not just atheists, but those that responded naturally, which are pretty representative of the field. Most philosophers are not just atheists, but naturalists and moral realists.
Right.
So,
and I agree.
Most philosophers, I think, would take serious issue with what Trent is saying here. Also, I think I don't know if I would say this with a sense of definitiveness, because I do think that there could be a discussion, a debate had on it. But I think that it seems, at least, that rape is a lot like murder, where it's an action that a human being does to another human being. We see animals from within species and even between species forcing sexual intercourse on to other animals, but it's not generally considered a rape. Just like when a lion kills another lion, like in a fight, we don't say that the lion murdered the other lion. These actions are generally contained within humanity and within human actions. Though I would say that I do think that there could be an argument or a debate rather had on that subject as to whether those notions should or could, or I guess you could say rather ought, extend beyond humans. But I think for the time being, it's at least generally considered that they're contained within humanity.
Right. Well,
at least according to what I've seen.
Right. Well, I'll share my view, I think, and I will say that I am an atheist. I'm a naturalist. I'm also a moral realist. I do think that there are objective moral truths. And as he pointed out, though I think most philosophers will say that moral truths necessitate to be a moral agent, you have to have some level of free will. And because most animals, such as a lion or a leopard or anything like that, they do not have free will like humans do. They don't have moral reasoning, and therefore they are not moral agents. However, humans are moral agents because we do have that capacity for reasoning and moral ethics. So
I agree with that last point there. To me, it's hard to obligate animals under our moral systems when they're. I do think that there is some sense of morality with a lot of these animal species, or particularly mammal species, but nothing, at least with most of them, nothing near where humans are at. And so to say that they can rape each other or murder each other, I just don't think we can obligate them to such actions. They're not moral agents like we are.
Right, because they simply do not have the same level of free will. They don't have the same level of moral realism,
deliberation or consideration. They don't deliberate morally or ethically about these kinds of things like we do.
Right, exactly. And that's the key difference between humans and other animals.
Exactly. And I like how you said humans and other animals instead of humans and animals.
Yeah,
but you're getting a degree in the biological sciences, so naturally.
Yeah, exactly. My degree is that I'm working on slowly but surely is the biochemistry and molecular biology. So obviously humans are animals. So that's why I said humans versus other animals, because humans are animals. But anyway, let's go.
Set of moral facts. They are most unlikely to have arisen in the ordinary course of events without an all-powerful God to create them. But why should we believe these moral facts exist? We are confident the external world is real and that other minds exist simply because those things seem to be real. If moral truths like rape is always wrong seem just as real, then the burden of proof is on the moral skeptic to show us why we should think otherwise. Now, Alex has previously said these moral truths are the objective consequences of subjective assumptions, like the goodness of increasing well-being. But if that's true, then they aren't objective because they depend on precarious assumptions we can and should challenge. For example, imagine we could genetically engineer human fetuses so they grow up with a desire to be slaves whose source of happiness comes from blindly obeying other people. That might cohere with the overall goal of promoting human pleasure or well-being, but many people will rightly say this is wrong because it contradicts a basic moral fact independent of that assumption, that we ought to treat human beings with dignity and respect. So if you believe in moral facts, then you should believe an all-powerful God created them. Second, human beings are morally responsible.
Yeah.
That the hypothetical he presented there is interesting. I don't really want to dig too deep into it right now because I think it's a long one. But what I was going to say with regards to that is that if this was something they actively desired, wouldn't allowing them to live that way be a respect to them?
Right.
I mean, it's to me, he's presupposing moral realism moving forward, which I believe Alex is. I don't know if Alex is a moral realist. I think he is, but don't quote me on that. I am not. I'm at least currently a moral anti-realist and a moral non-cognitivist. So the statement "rape is wrong" I don't think actually possesses truth value. Or rather, I don't think it's a truth-apt statement. What I think is being expressed by the statement "rape is wrong" is merely one ought not rape. That moral statements prescribe an imperative or an obligation. They prescribe an ought. One ought to do or ought not do some action. But to say that they have truth value, to say that they're truth apt is something that I would simply reject.
Right, and that's something where you and I would disagree on, and I think that'll be I think that'll be a really fun discussion to have with you at another point in time.
The other thing I wanted to say quickly is that if morality is rooted in God, given that God is an independent moral subject, that would make morality subjective.
Right, and as I pointed out earlier, and I think this is probably the strongest argument against the moral argument for God, is that how do we objectively know what God wants us to do? When Christians can't even agree on what the Bible is, and I can make up whatever God I want in order to justify my actions. If I want to say that, abortion is morally permissible, and someone asks me why, well, I can easily just say because God said so, and my religion says so. So it's like, okay, where do we draw the line? Which God do we listen to? Which interpretation of that God do we listen to? To me, appealing to God is still very subjective.
Yes.
Hey, Church of Entropy, good to see you.
Responsible for their actions. Alex says all physical events are determined by prior physical causes. But if that's the case and we lack free will and arsonists and serial killers are just as determined as lightning bolts and tigers, then it would be nonsensical to blame humans for actions just as it'd be nonsensical
to lack free will. In fact, the very notion of libertarian free will to me actually seems to run counter to some of the statements, and this isn't true with just Trent. I would say that this is true with William Lane Craig and actually a large amount of theistic apologists. This notion of libertarian free will seems to contradict the notions of what is often referred to as the principle of causality, or something along those lines, where under a libertarian free will view, there are no sufficient conditions for any decision that's made, or at least largely speaking, there isn't. That these decisions are made literally stochastically. If there were any prior antecedent factors that played in to that decision being made, how is it libertarian free will? Because the action that you're engaging in is based off of other factors that may lie beyond your will alone. So it seems that I would argue, I don't think humans could have agency or will without antecedent determining factors from which we make those decisions. The very idea of libertarian free will seems almost incoherent to me, and it seems to contradict the very principle of causality that theists seek to invoke in other areas.
Right, and I would agree with you there. I would agree with you 100%. And and here we say that he's going back to other animals. Like there's a reason why we don't hold lions to the same moral standard that we do, and that's because lions are not moral agents. Humans are. And
morally blame a hurricane. Moreover, if punishment isn't something that's deserved, but rather something the state metes out for the good of society, the state could theoretically punish innocent people, like a criminal's family members, if such an act reduced crime overall by deterring criminals who at least care for their family members. But it's objectively true human beings are capable of being blamed, and it's objectively wrong to intentionally punish innocent people. This is something that only a divine foundation of morality could make sense to hold up moral realism. So when all these...
Okay, and can you substantiate that?
Yeah, what's the argument for that?
Yeah, I heard an insertion, but I really didn't hear any supporting facts for it.
Arguments are seen as a whole. They form a strong case that there is a changeless, timeless, immaterial, infinite, necessarily existing, all-powerful, all-knowing, and all-good cause of the universe, or what most people refer to as God.
Thank you very much, Trent.
So that was pretty much Trent's entire opening statement. I think we should definitely do a part 2 and possibly a part 3 diving into the rest of the debate. Just because
do they have an open discussion, or is it just the introduction, some rebuttals, and then a cross-examination and closing statements? I don't recall hearing anything about an open discussion, because I was going to say is that we could. I don't think we really need to go over Alex's introduction. We'll probably agree with a lot of what he said, but if like say we could listen to it and just let it play and then hear Trent's rebuttal and do a response to that. And then maybe, do a response or an examination of their cross-examination period, which I think would be very interesting to do.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's a pretty interesting cross-examination. And also...
Is it a good one?
Yeah, it's pretty good. And
nice.
I think it'll be... And I will say that this is one of the top debates on YouTube. I absolutely love Trent Horn and CosmicSkeptic. They're both really good debaters. Very good
debaters and good at philosophy too, which I like.
Yes. Definitely check out CosmicSkeptic's channel and check out Trent Horn's channel. I'll put a link to their channels in the description down below. But yeah, this is definitely worth diving deeper into. I think this is probably a good place to stop, just because we're over.
Yeah, I think it is a good place. Oh shit, we did get over an hour, didn't we? Wow, that moved pretty quick, actually. I was thinking we were, at like 45 minutes or something.
Yeah, time flies pretty quickly, doesn't it?
Oh yeah, especially when you're, taking a pretty deep examination into some of this stuff.
Yeah, it really does. So anyway, when are you free to do a part 2?
I would probably say next Monday or not Tuesday. Tuesdays are going to be out for me, unless it would be before 5 or 6 p.m. on a Tuesday. But Monday, I don't think I have anything going on Monday.
Yeah, Monday evening should work. So, yeah, join us Monday evening. Probably around the same time.
We're going to do the same time, 9 ET?
Yeah.
Okay.
9 Eastern time on Monday, we'll be diving into part 2 of this debate. Really good debate, and I hope to see you all back on Monday nights as we continue this debate review. So, Leo, anything coming up on your channel?
Right now, so I'm still working on a couple of response videos that are going to be edited content, and I'm still learning a little bit about iMovie, so I'm going to be working on one that is a response to the guys over at Thought Adventure Podcast, which is a Muslim apologetics and Islamic apologetics channel, and they did a video on quantum mechanics and causality, so I will be hopefully getting an edited response out to that. I'd like to have that out probably sometime mid-late next week. I do have a friend that knows iMovie well, so he will be able to help walk me through some of that stuff. And once I know what I'm doing, it's not going to take me long to make this. Before I get started in iMovie, I just need to write the script and then record the response and then actually do all of the editing and everything like that. And then that should be out. Yeah, and then after that, what I would like to do is an edited response to Jason Lyle's anisotropic synchrony convention.
Yeah, and Leo, this might actually be a fun series for us to do if you want to do like a weekly or bi-weekly series talking about Dr. Lyle and other young Earth astronomers and just going through some of their content and going through it. I think that'll be a fun project for us.
I'm open to that.
Yeah, kind of like Dabber Dino does Eric with Erica, Kent with Ben. We could do Liar with Leo.
Yeah, hey, yeah, Lyle with Leo. That's pretty good. I like that.
Yeah, and other young Earth
and other young Earth and other creationist cosmology blunders.
Yeah, and that'll be a lot of fun to do. Anyway, if you like this video, hit the like button and the subscribe button down below, and don't forget to hit the bell notification so you can be notified when I go live and have content coming up. And go over to Leo's channel and hit the like button and the subscribe button. And the bell
do not subscribe to my channel. Whatever you do not subscribe to my channel. That place is a hellhole. I don't know what's going on over there. Just stay very far away.
Yep. And if you like what I am doing and you want to support me, you can become a Patreon, patreon.com/David Neff, where you can make a one-time donation through PayPal, Venmo, or GoFundMe. A link to that is in the description down below. Anyway, thank you guys so much for joining. Have a wonderful evening, and we are out.